It's just, I suppose, what's in that picture which fascinates me is the way that the Neapolitans treat the walls of their city, irrespective of the grandeur of the architect, as this sort of epic poem. I mean, it's just the necessity to write and draw and scribble, and it's actually it's very Saitombi in a way.
To make that mark.
Yeah, and then you go to Pompeii, and they did that in Pompeii 2,000 years ago. And that sort of continuity is something I find completely fascinating. And actually, I have to say, I could have, in England we live in their sort of National Trust rooftop areas and brown plaques and don't touch this, and it's very refreshing to go to a city which is, it's utterly democratic, because it all belongs to, anybody can write on anything. And also I think that sort of comes from a culture that has been ruled by so many foreign powers that they just have no respect for they just want the power to move on, to be replaced by another one, and they have no affection really for the kind of the monuments that were left as symbols of power.
And what about outsiders or visitors? Then they tolerate visitors with the same kind of cynical pragmatism. So you were allowed to do what you wanted to do, but in a sense you were aware, if not of hostility, a kind of passive aggression. Is that right?
Yeah, I remember reading a book by a guy. He lived in Naples for years and had coffee every morning in the same place, and he went away for 6 months and came back and they refused to recognise him. as it was a statement. Who do you think you are going off?
Do you distinguish significantly between the photographs of pure cityscape, buildings or scenes without people, particularly the church actually, showing the church, the children were there, and ones where there are children? Are they the same thing, but in a kind of mirror image of each other?
Do you know Eric Ravilius?
Yes, of course. He used to sell his work, didn't he?
He was the only official war artist who'd been missing on active service, and he did these. I adore them, and everybody's taste, but these sort of interiors where just sort of a bed in an interior with paper or whatever, and you just have this sort of sense of the person who left the room. And I think that's what some of the purely architectural photographs are about. Somebody's left the space, but has left a little bit of their essence behind, which I quite like.
Thanks for Ravilius, because Ravilius and others were artists that you did do some secondary market reading in, I think, but when you worked for the Fine Arts Society.
That was the world's worst art dealer.
I think there'd be many candidates for that, but sitting next to one actually. So what led you into becoming an art dealer, and what made you realise that actually you needed to do something else? I mean, did photography, Siren, like in this context, lure you away from the Fine Arts Society, or did you just
No, I was a director of a company for years, and I just got incredibly bored by selling pictures to people. It was just dull people who thought that they would see more interesting if they had that watercolor wall. There's a limit to how many years you can do that.
I feel the Siren like I should lure you into this kind of rocky terrain. So how do you feel about the people who own your work?
Well, I'm only they're not dull. I don't know, I had a great time being an art dealer. I used to love elements of it that just became very repetitive. And I just got to that tricky age of about 35 where I thought, well, I can do this for the rest of my life, or I have to throw foundations for work. So I left not having any to do.
You made the break, and not an inkling.
So, no.
Okay, so let's have the creation myth about how Johnnie Shand Kydd became the man that we now know. What was there a kind of Damascene moment where you were with a character?
I was just twiddling my thumbs hopelessly, not having any idea what to do. And then I remember this book called Private View that was published in the 60s.
One of the Brian Robertson, John Russell, and Lord Snow.
Yes, exactly. Which was about the London art world, and it was a big, glossy, fabulous book. And Hockney when he was young, Bacon when he was young. I mean, it was a wonderful book. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to do something like that? So I had the idea of being the editor and then getting professional photographers to take pictures and write it. And it never really came to anything, but that Thames and Hudson's. And then, because it wasn't happening, I thought, well, why don't I just get a point and shoot and run out to start snapping? And Thames and Hudson said, why don't we use your pictures and stuff like that? And then,
So Spitfire was, in a sense, the successor to Private View.
yeah, but it was kind of
Smaller scale.
small, and then it was totally different. And actually, in retrospect, I think you couldn't possibly do Private View now, because in the 60s, the London art world was very London, and now it's so international, there's no way you could possibly do a London.
But interestingly, that Private View was very stratified. Not only did it have a writer, a photographer, and a director, a curator who compiled it, it was very clear. I mean, I think there are probably more than 3 generations, but I seem to remember in one of the introduction that they very much saw a kind of older, middle, and senior generation of artists. Now, I suppose the London art scene by the 90s had become more amorphous, but you very much became immersed in one particular generation.
Yes. But partly because they were friends. And it was a strange thing, because I was sort of recording and not really quite knowing what the pictures were going to, how they were going to end up. And then there's that rather scary moment when you have to go from private to public, you actually publish, and which changes the rules completely.
How much censorship did you perform on behalf of your subjects, and how much did they want to have an input onto that?
Nobody else got involved, but I obviously removed anything that could be compromising.
Of your subject or yourself?
No, sorry.
I suppose it's probably too early in people's lives to share some of those compromising.
No, but I also, as I was quite late on in that, in that, I started photographing in '95 or something, so this artist has been around for a long time. But it was still that moment where everything was just on the cusp. And what's great about all the artists I was photographing then is they weren't interested in controlling their image. So they were very kind of relaxed and generous with their image. And then a bit later along the line, you get that thing where, we're not sure about using that picture, which becomes less interesting, because I like that early moment when it's just, can we use the toss?
Okay, so you've actually answered the question, so it is to do with their age. But how much do you think it was to do with the trust of you?
There had to be an element of that. I mean, I don't think that screwed up, and I might have, unwittingly, but I don't think that.
And in Naples, how much did people try and stop you physically taking photographs? So do you think you managed somehow to get that trust?
Again, that's another thing I was writing about this morning, is that street photography is almost impossible now, because the paranoia of privacy, security, and pedophilia. And so, when I first went to Naples, people literally were offering, you must take a photograph of my child. By the time I finished, it was like, let me go away, you must be a pervert if you've got a camera. Which I think is kind of very ironic, considering now, every single person's got one of these with a camera. So it's this sort of conflict of sort of paranoia about a camera, but then everybody's doing this. And I think, when I was taking photographs on the beach, and these two sort of Neapolitan heavies came up and said, we've been watching you photograph solo bambini. And I went, oh no, I had a pathetic sono buono. But scary, really scary. And you could, it's a lynching situation there. And also because you were using film, everybody wanted to prove it. And, It's dreadful, actually. I mean, it's a great genre which is sort of dying a slow death.
I wonder, though, to flip that, whether, it may be only subconscious, but whether having those kind of rules again means that there's something at least to try and kick against or try and break through. One of the disadvantages about being in a world of 10, 15 years ago where everyone was taking photographs and anything seemed possible, anything seemed to be able to go, is that everyone was doing it. Now, with these restrictions, there's a challenge, isn't there? Or do you not see it in those terms? Am I just slightly over-interpreting?
I know what you mean,
but you're not a war photographer, so that doesn't interest you.
And I don't really want to be sort of chased down the street by hysterical mothers. that's Johnny's. That seems to be your parallel of war. I was mentioning war, and you said hysterical mothers chasing. I never was
maybe more.
But the privacy thing. Can you imagine Don McCullen as a war asking just before sort of a Vietnamese soldier dies as last thing? Do you mind signing this release form? It's just nonsense. And I've always taken the policy to just publish and be damned, risk it. Somebody doesn't come to it. Because every country seems to have another different rule about, France, you could be legally in the... It's just a nightmare.
You said you were accused of photographing Bambini. Of course, one of the most memorable series in Siren City does involve Bambini, or Bambino, but it's a doll. Russalella, yeah. That is extraordinary. I'd love you to tell me the backstory of that.
Well, I'll tell you what had happened. There was each church in Italy has a Madonna of the Blind, Madonna of the Childless, and there's something called Montevergine, which used to be, but the Catholic Church has stopped it, the Madonna of the Other, which is basically the trannies. And I wanted to go there, on this sort of annual, and there was apparently this procession of transsexuals in full wigs and lace and things. But by the time I got there, it had obviously, the church had crushed it. But the only person there was Russalella, who means little red-haired girl, which is about 86. And in the course of conversation, we discovered that she was the last practitioner of this ancient ritual, which nobody knows where the origins lie, where the Femminelli basically is someone who's female from the waist up and male from the waist down.
Photographs on the wall just there, the largest. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They do this sort of birthing thing, and we went round to the Cartier Staglioli, and she put a wig on, or he put his wig on, lay on the bed and sort of went into labour, and then when his waters broke, it's a little bit confusing, he goes to the window and goes, help me, help me! And then sort of the other Femminelli in the area come and help with the labour, but unfortunately, her friend was turning a trick at the time. So the wig came off, the coat came on, woolly hat came on, and just a lot of knocking on doors, come out, come out, come out. And then a bit later, Russalella came back and sort of went back into labour again, and then this massive Femminelli with her pimp turned up, in case any money was public. And then finally gives birth to this plastic doll. And then they wanted to go to bless the doll in the church, at which point, no, had enough. But the weird thing about it is that it has a real Benny Hill quality, but actually being there, it was possibly one of the most primal and disconcerting and horror. I was sweating, sweat just pouring off me. And then I heard the Malaparte in a book called The Skin, Kelly had written this chapter called The Son of Adam, in which he described a similar thing in 1947.
Book's 49, so 47, yeah.
And it's an area outside, I think it's called Torre Annunziata or something. And he goes, and there's a whole community of Femminelli. And instead of it being a plastic doll, there's a sort of carved wooden totem. But the guy giving birth there is a young man with a beard, very muscular. And he goes through the whole thing, and what I didn't see in this performance, which was in the Malaparte, at the very end, he reverts to his masculinity, and all the muscles of his neck start knotting, and then he gets very aggressive and violent. He kind of reverts to being a man again, with all this a bacchanalian group of Femminelli screaming blue murder around. I didn't see that, but this is a sort of slightly watered down version of that tradition. And I would imagine this is the last practitioner.
To your knowledge, are there photographs in existence of this practice?
I haven't seen it.
Nor have I. And one of I wouldn't be so cautious to use the phrase money shot, but one of the reasons you might be supposed to is because you had a kind of an extraordinary subject matter that is kind of deep into the city, but it's something that you've kind of almost originally produced visually. But I'm genuinely curious as to why, let me hear a reference notwithstanding, why you felt that to go to the church where a doll was blessed was the stage too far. You mean that's when it dissolved into absurdity? You'd gone through this amazing ritual and that was it?
I was kind of freaked out by that stage. I was like, I can't cope anymore. It's going somewhere so dark and odd that I can't cope with it.